Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for Atlanta Business Radio. Brought to you by OnPay. Built in Atlanta, OnPay is the top-rated payroll and HR software anywhere. Get 1 month free at onpay.com. Now, here's your host.
Lee Cantor here, another episode of Atlanta Business Radio, and this is going to be a fun one. But before we get started, I'd like to once again thank our sponsor, OnPay. Without them, we could not be sharing these stories, so please go to their website, support them. Today on Atlanta Business Radio, we got Jeremy Heilpern, and he is with Ammunition. Welcome, Jeremy.
Good morning. How are you?
Great. Before we get too far into things, tell us about Ammunition. How are you serving folks?
Yeah, so Ammunition's a full-service advertising agency. We're a little bit unique in that we have a pretty intentional vertical focus. So the brands that we serve are only in kind of one of four categories, one being building materials, two, higher education, three being healthcare, and four being financial services. So a full-service agency, but real focus on serving those four key verticals.
Now, tell us a little bit about your backstory. How did this come about?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit of a nerd for advertising. I maybe digressing a little bit here in the discussion. I started my first agency when I was 12 years old. Started teaching myself how to code and design and all that kind of stuff. Set up shop online and started recruiting clients. I did fairly well with that. Ended up going to a college when I was 14, graduated when I was 18, and then started working with a number of agencies around Atlanta. During that process, I started getting a feel for what I thought worked and didn't work in the agency model. And back then, you know, some folks may recall who are listening, there was kind of this weird time where agencies are trying to figure out how you merge digital and the more kind of traditional services together. And some were doing really well and some were not. And I got hired by an agency that really hadn't figured out how to do that yet. They're a 30-year-old shop, and they were really looking to kind of embrace that hybrid agency model and bring some of that thinking to their, you know, a little bit older, kind of more traditional client base. And I spent about 10 years there kind of working the ranks up, eventually took over as president of that shop for a couple of years. And then just decided, you know, if I was as smart as I thought I would, as I thought I am, I could do this on my own, and decided November 6th of 2017 to start Ammunition, signed a lease for an office the very next day, and just got to work.
Now, since you've kind of gone through the ranks and have seen the evolution of advertising and social media and PR and the blurring of all of those kind of practices, where do you think the biggest disconnect is with those kind of legacy traditional firms when they're trying to kind of embrace this newer technology? Where do you think the gaps are?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple components to that in my mind. I think number one is this kind of siloed agency model has gone on for some time, right? Where you have a PR agency, you've got your media buying agency, you've got your creative agency, you've got your digital agency. And I think that has served some brands well. And I think you could probably get, you know, CMOs on the call who've said that that's worked well for them. And I think on the other hand, what you see on the agency side of that is a siloing of information, right? If my agency is holding the creative bag for a particular brand and I don't know what the PR company is doing, right, we can't complement each other super well. Or on the flip side, if we're launching a new creative campaign, for example, and the PR agency is kind of, marching to a beat of a different drum, we kind of get out of step with one another. So I think the blind spots become when you start to silo those services because you don't have a full service partner. I think you end up, number one, you're paying for redundant account people and agency processes and project managers and all of that kind of stuff. So you're inevitably spending more money than you need to be. But number two, I think you end up kind of having this dilution of information from agency to agency where each agency is then kind of incentivized to pull in its own direction. And they can find themselves out of step with what I believe to be kind of the holistic brand strategy that might be being deployed say at the brand level, and then it's kind of getting missed when you get down to the different agencies who might be supporting.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you focus on four main areas. How did those four main areas come about?
Yeah, I think in our experience, for all of time, I think agencies have kind of, been willing to chase a buck anywhere they can find it. And I think that's led to a commoditization of agencies where, a lot of agencies aren't on retainer models anymore. They kind of swing project to project. And that leads to a lot of uncertainty at the agency kind of operations level. And we've been able to be fortunate by saying, we want to take these four key verticals that we service and really deliver value such that when we're in the room, for example, pitching a piece of business, we'll probably spend 90% of that conversation talking about their business, the challenges they're facing in their industry, the complexity of their go-to-market process, whatever those things happen to be. And then maybe we'll spend the other 10% talking how creative and technology services can help deliver on meeting their internal KPIs. And so I think for us, we've been able to very quickly stand up an agency with some level of financial stability because we're almost exclusively retainer-based with the brands that we serve. And I think that's because we were willing to say, we're not a beer and bubblegum shop. We're not the agency you hire if you want a TV spot that's going to get somebody to run out to a Quick Trip and pick up your product, right? We're the agency you hire when you have a 6, 12, 18, 24-month conversion process where somebody may be interested in your product, but if I'm going to remodel my kitchen, for example, I don't know about you or anybody else who's listening, but I'm not doing that every 6 months. And if I am doing it, it's probably a really thought out decision, right? And I'm spending $20,000 to $60,000 to do that remodel. And I'm really going to consider the brands that I might put inside my home. And so what we do and why we service these 4 categories is really 2 kind of key reasons. Number one, we've been fortunate to hire senior leadership who've been CMO of brands in the home appliance space or CIOs at higher education institutions, right? So we have deep institutional knowledge within our agency that I think most agencies just don't have. We've got folks who joke with our clients who've been on their side of the table, right? We're not just agency folks. We've kind of done the hard work on the other side of the fence as well. But number 2 is I think each one of those categories that I outlined are not decisions. They're not purchase processes that take place overnight. They're long lead sales cycles. And so we've gotten very good at crafting the process of how do I get somebody from that initial point of awareness such that now we've driven demand for that product or that service, and then managing the entirety of that lead process through to a conversion. So I think kind of at its core, one of the things that makes us a little bit unique in that process is the intersection of our work as it relates to, we're not just hired by a marketing team, for example. We interact with marketing as well as sales, as well as IT to get these types of programs built.
Now, you mentioned earlier that there's a lot of siloing in this business and that from a brand or a customer standpoint, they have different folks that do different activities. Do you insist on being kind of, hey, we're either the quarterback or we are kind of running the show or we don't play? Like we just don't work with brands that want us to be siloed or want us on a kind of one-off basis. Like, are you at that kind of maturity in your business right now?
I would say yes and no. I would say that regardless of whether or not we're sharing a place in the sandbox with another agency, which candidly we do. We have a couple of relationships where there is another agency that we work with as a counterpart, and we try to get ahead of that with our clients and create a process around knowledge sharing, having regular meetings with those agency partners so that we're all kind of sharing the status sheet, let's call it, the projects that we're working on, presenting to them as well as asking them to present to us so that we have that knowledge transfer. If there's product launches that are happening at the brand level, we try to facilitate a meeting where all agency partners, all internal folks are in the same room or conference call, given recent events, to be able to kind of kick off those discussions such that we're all kind of aligned and moving in that process in a meaningful way. I think on the other hand, we do try to, where possible, become the quarterback in the process where, it is our belief that you need kind of a single voice in the process who's kind of leading that way. So whether it's us or we're taking a backseat to another agency, I do think it makes sense that if there are multiple agencies in the process, those lines of demarcation need to be clear such that there is that single point of truth, if you will, so that everyone's kind of marching in step one with another. And I do think ultimately that has to happen on the client side, right? Like at the end of the day, like every agency's trying to get ahead. We're all trying to expand our business, take on more work, do more interesting things. And I think to get that relationship right, it happens at the client level. All that said, for us, we do try to put ourselves in that driver's seat so that we can help really affect the change that we think ultimately needs to happen. And we have some level of success with that because most agencies that we might share a sandbox with may be, a pure play PR specialist, and they really, really got that nailed. And so we may defer to them in that process and say, you're doing great work. Let's keep it going. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that everything that we do is falling in line such that we're kind of aligned to the KPIs of the brand versus the KPIs of the agency.
Now, navigating other kind of partners in the work, like you mentioned, has its own challenges, but how do you get through the silos of the organizations you deal with? I mean, you're dealing with sales and marketing specifically. How do you get them on the same page? Because a lot of times, they might not be competitive, but, sales is blaming marketing for not the right leads, and marketing is blaming sales for not being able to close the leads. Like, there's a lot of internal kind of friction in a lot of organizations. How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one we run up against a lot. But one of the things that we've learned over the last few years has been that I think in most organizations, sales is seen as a growth driver, and marketing is typically seen as an expense, right? And I'm not saying that that's my point of view or that's right, but I think that that's kind of what naturally occurs. And so I think getting sales and marketing to be aligned has been critical for us. If sales sees marketing as a partner, that's a good thing. That's a win. And we found in our experience that sales has the ability to really affect change within an organization in a really meaningful way that at times marketing is not quite as set up to do. That said, that changes from organization to organization, depending on how they view each one of those disciplines and how they have their organization set up and what that reporting structure might look like. But kind of the core answer to your question, I think, is for us trying to align the needs of both organizations such that we can actually affect the change that we want, and everybody can see that the role that they play in the process is ultimately positively contributing to what it is that organization is ultimately trying to do, which is grow sales, grow market share, grow whatever that happens to be.
Now, in today's advertising world, that is it's an interesting time because of technology is being developed so quickly. There's different channels and platforms that didn't exist 2 years ago, always, rearing their head. How do you kind of keep your clients focused on kind of the metrics that matter? Sometimes the business gets hung up on things that it seems important, it looks important. I equate this to Moneyball. I don't know if you ever saw that movie, but did you ever see that movie?
I did, yeah.
Okay, so you're familiar. Back in the day in baseball, they used to look at certain statistics as these are the statistics because they were easy to see, and it was not. They weren't really diving deep. It was kind of superficial, but it was obvious, and so anybody out there could see them. But when they start digging deeper, there might be another way to skin the cat that isn't as sexy or glamorous, but it still gets the job done. How do you kind of see yourself in this world when you're kind of communicating with your clients in order to explain to them and for them to really get them to believe that we call these cosmetrics that look good, sound good, maybe you bring them up at the club, but the ones that matter are like, we call it green dollar ROI, like the revenue and things like that, that maybe are harder to measure, but have more of an impact on your business.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I was sitting in a meeting. This is maybe 5-6 years ago, and I was at a different agency, and we were sitting in the room. We were kind of the AOR, but the client had a media agency as well. And the media agency was giving a presentation about how successful the media program was. And I'll never forget the moment because the client happened to be in my office sitting across the table from me, and this media partner was presenting via conference call. And their key media metric on the chart for the campaign wrap-up was that they had spent the budget in full.
And they're high-fiving, right?
The key metric.
That's a high five that they're going around the room bragging about.
Yeah. We spent your money was the key metric. And I'll never forget the client putting that call on mute and just freaking out that was so off the mark, so not what mattered to him. And I think that's true. I think agencies, and that one feels like a very obvious example, right? But I think you can go down the list of kind of the cosmetic KPIs that folks try to merchandise. How many impressions did you get? What was that reach? Those are very benign metrics in today's day and age. I think that's why for us, as we sit in the position of being a very sales-focused agency, we tend to try to be very focused on being able to close the loop on the entirety of that sales process so we can get a very accurate understanding of what's the ROI for the program that we've built, and being able to track that truly from a data standpoint with real-time dashboarding to say, here's for every $1 you're putting in, you're getting $3 back, and here's how that's working. So I think any metric you're using ultimately, and I'm sure there's others that would challenge my thinking on this, but any metric you're using that is not a sales metric is a cosmetic metric meant to make you feel better or try to find a signal that you're heading in the right direction. And certainly they have their place, but I think for for a meaningful agency partner who's serving as kind of that quote agency of record, you need to be aligned to the core KPIs that the organization has, which all day, every day is going to be sales.
So I guess that's a little bit of a contrarian point of view for most of the agency folks you hang out with in other agencies.
Yeah, I like to joke with them that, likes are nice, but sales are better. At the end of the day, you can keep, opening up social profiles, building cool social campaigns. And yeah, there's a place for great entertaining work for sure. Like I would never undermine the value of good creative, but it has to be done with a lens towards how are you actually building business at the end of the day. Because simply winning an award with the one club is not going to ultimately mean that your client's work is more successful or that you've actually helped build the business in a meaningful way. And I do think that, for the purists in the industry, there's a love for the creative, there's a love for the work that absolutely we should all have. But it needs to be done with that focus on, is that love for the work, is what you're doing actually moving the needle on your client's business? Because if it's not, you probably aren't going to have a seat at the table for very long.
Yeah, when I back in the day when I was in college, I have a degree in advertising, and one of my professors said something that it kind of was disheartening to me at the time, but I think it's still valid today. Is it's not creative unless it sells. I mean, that's what our job is to sell something.
That's right.
Our job isn't to just make you laugh and forget who paid the check for that laughter. If there's a disconnect between the creativity and the results, then you got a problem.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And I think in the current climate that we're in today, right, where it's almost every week there's a new social platform or there's a new trending this or that, it becomes then very easy to say, well, I just want to keep doing stuff that kind of quote goes viral on those platforms. I had a client once upon a time who had regularly briefed the agency that he wanted a viral idea, and that's all he wanted. He wanted a viral idea. And it's just not that simple, right? Like you can't just engineer virality. Certainly there are people with followings who can go viral with a greater ability than somebody else. But, for you to follow a brand, like we work on very unsexy brands, if I can say that. We're talking appliance manufacturers, talking HVAC manufacturers, talking plumbing manufacturers. Like, it's the stuff that, maybe it's not beer and bubble gum, right? But you still got to give those brands a reason to exist. You got to give them a story. You've got to find heart in how you kind of message those brands, because there is great work that can be done there. But those brands aren't going to quote go viral on TikTok, right? So being able to figure out how you give that brand a tone of voice, find a reason for folks to engage, to follow. I think it's a big leap if you're selling ventilation systems, for example, and somebody wants to follow you on Instagram. You can't just be pushing product all day, every day. Like there needs to be something entertaining and engaging. And that's what we try to bring to the table with our clients is, why are you here? Who are you hoping to attract by being on this platform? What's the type of content you're trying to push out? And then how do we make sure that strategically that ties back to what we're all trying to do at a sales performance level, and making sure all those platforms are being held accountable. So just chasing it, kind of going back to where this conversation started, chasing the next just cool piece of creative. It's very easy to get lost in the sea of everything that can happen from let's even just call it a social landscape, for example, versus being very intentional about where you play, what you're doing there, and what you're expecting to achieve by participating in that platform.
Yeah, and I don't think that people understand, in order to create that viral content, what are you willing to sacrifice in terms of brand authenticity in order to pull that off?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times the things that go viral aren't going viral for really good reasons. And the stuff that gets shared to millions of people are stuff that are either controversial, they're definitely inauthentic for most brands, and they're not really attracting the people that buy their stuff anyway. The number of people that buy any of your client stuff isn't, millions and millions of people. It's focus on the few people that are buying the stuff and serve the heck out of them, and you're going to get a good result. And don't get hypnotized by big numbers that maybe somebody may or may not be really getting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really true. And I think that's why, our point of view tends to be that on the outset, whenever we get engaged with somebody, we try to take a hard look at, okay, let's audit what you're doing today and why you're doing it, right? And what are you expecting to achieve? So it's very easy to get, distracted by every shiny object that exists and chase after being on every platform and service and publication that you can possibly get your hands on. But I think there's something to be said for intentionality around where you're going to put your brand, and then where you are, making sure you've got a real strategy around who is it that's going to engage with you on that platform, right? So for example, if I'm working on an HVAC brand and I'm on Instagram, I'm probably targeting homeowners more than I'm targeting a builder, right? Whereas conversely, if I'm running advertising, say on LinkedIn, that's probably going more likely to a builder than it is to a homeowner. And so I can talk differently, I can present different messaging, I can link to different resources, but it's really about understanding who you're talking to and what they want from you on that platform, and then making sure you're giving a real reason to belong versus just participating because it's the next cool thing to be doing.
Now, it sounds like when you're interacting with your clients, you're spending a lot of time, you're investing a lot of time in kind of managing their expectations and kind of telling them sometimes some hard truths that maybe other agencies haven't told them. Is that something that's just part of your value system, that's part of your kind of differentiator when you're coming to them? Then you truly become a trusted resource. You're a trusted advisor for them. You're kind of the voice of reason in the room rather than just fluffing up some numbers or trying to make them feel good about something that maybe wasn't that effective.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, that's certainly the role we try to play. I think depending on the brand that we're being engaged to work with, it may be a very established brand who feels like they have all the answers already, and they're asking us to help them kind of execute the plan that they've already written. And then on the flip side, there may be brands that are trying to kind of rethink everything. We're in discussions right now with a brand who was recently acquired by a private equity company, and they're trying to refresh the brand, give it a whole new go-to-market strategy, redefine who and what they're all about, and figure out how they then remap that new sales process. And we're in consideration, not because we're the oldest standing agency with the deepest book competing for the business, but because in their words, they've come to us because they feel like they can skip a few steps in their go-to-market process because of just the institutional knowledge we have about the category. So I think for us, we try to be students of the categories that we're serving, but I think we also try to be leaders and help push those categories forward in a really meaningful way. So when we are engaged, we try to be that agency that comes in and will give you a fresh perspective. And listen, I'm going to tell you what I think, and you may not like it, and that's fine. I'm happy to do what it is. If you think you've got the answers and you want us to trust you, that's great. But we're definitely going to be the partner in the room who's at least going to tell you what we think and make an alternate recommendation if we think that that's the appropriate course of action. But, again, if you've done the research and you feel like you've got the answers, we'll do our best by you with the information you've got and execute to the best of our ability.
Now, what's the pain that your clients are having where ammunition is the right fit for them? Like, have they plateaued? Are they frustrated with their previous agency? Like, when do you come into the conversation as a potential resource for them?
Yeah, I would say that mostly we're winning businesses around kind of two components. One is it's kind of what you said. There's a little bit of plateauing of the work where they feel like it's gotten stale. They need a fresh perspective. They're not, maybe they're with an agency they've been working with 8, 9, 10 years, and they feel like they've kind of worked their way down to the B team, and they don't really feel like the work's moving in the direction they want it to go. And that's not unique to us. I mean, I think that agencies do have this ability to become complacent over time and take the business for granted. So I think in areas where agencies are maybe taking the business for granted are where we tend to get a phone call and are brought in to provide a perspective. And number two, I think it's around brands who feel like they're having to explain the category to their clients or to their agency all the time. So if I'm working in the building materials space, I don't have to explain to my agency partner why I have to drive demand among homeowners, what that means to builders, how that affects distribution, how architects and designers fit in that mix. Like, isn't it so much more valuable if I can onboard an agency who already understands all that complexity? I can brief them on my business, what I'm trying to do, and we can just get to work versus having to explain the importance of a distributor in the sales process to an account executive at another agency, right? So I think for us, it's very much about because of that vertical focus, we can kind of bolt our team on as an extension of an in-house marketing team and get to work, get up to speed very quickly in a way that I think other agencies have to stop, get educated on the space, get educated on the brand, the competitive landscape, and kind of the intricacies of the go-to-market strategies and all that kind of stuff. Whereas we can skip all those steps and be ready to go day one.
Now, if somebody wanted to learn more, have a more substantive conversation with you or somebody on your team, what's the website?
Ammunition.agency. So it's kind of tricky. There's no .com there. It's just ammunition.agency.
Good stuff. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right. This is Lee Cantor. We will see you all next time on Atlanta Business Radio. And remember to support our sponsor, OnPay. By supporting them, we can continue to share these important stories.
Today's episode of Atlanta Business Radio is brought to you by OnPay. Built in Atlanta, OnPay is the top-rated payroll and HR software anywhere. Get 1 month free at onpay.com.